On March 28, 2007, Circuit City's leadership made an announcement. They were laying off 3,400 employees, all at once. But here's the detail that made this different from a normal layoff. These weren't underperforming workers. They were fired specifically for being paid too much, for being too good at their jobs. Less than 2 years later, the entire company was gone. This is the story of Circuit City and the single decision that turned a struggling company into a dead one. But to understand why this decision was so devastating, we need to go back to where this company actually started. And it starts somewhere you wouldn't expect. A barbershop.
It's 1949. A man named Samuel Wurtzel is on vacation in Richmond, Virginia, getting a haircut. And the barber mentions, almost as small talk, that Richmond is about to get its first ever television broadcast station in the South. Wurtzel isn't a TV repairman. He isn't an electronics guy at all. He's an importer-exporter from New York, just passing through on vacation. But he does the math in his head, right there in the chair. If people in this city are about to get television for the first time, they're going to need somewhere to buy a television set. So he moves his entire family to Richmond and opens a tiny store. He names it Ward's, an acronym made from his family's names. W for Wurtzel, A for his son Alan, R for his wife Ruth, D for his son David, S for Sam himself. Between 1949 and 1953, the number of American households with a television set exploded from under 1 million to 20 million. Wurtzel had bet correctly at exactly the right moment.
For the next 2 decades, Wurtzel and later his son Alan kept expanding, adding appliances, buying up local chains, experimenting with discount retail formats. Then, in the mid-1970s, they hit on something bigger, a new store format, enormous showrooms stocked with every major electronics brand side by side, staffed by genuinely knowledgeable salespeople, with an actual pickup area so you could just take your TV home the same day. In 1977, they opened the first store under a new name for this format, Circuit City. It caught on immediately. Through the 1980s and into the 90s, Circuit City expanded into an electronic superstore empire, over 600 locations, tens of thousands of employees. By the early 1990s, Circuit City wasn't just successful, it was the undisputed leader of consumer electronics retail in America. In the 1980s, it was actually the New York Stock Exchange's top-performing stock of the entire decade. Business researcher Jim Collins later featured Circuit City in his best-selling book, Good to Great, holding it up as a model for how disciplined, well-run companies achieve lasting success. The secret to all of it was simple. Circuit City paid its salespeople on commission. The better they understood the products, the better they served customers, the more they personally earned. Everyone's incentives lined up. Knowledgeable, motivated salespeople weren't just a nice feature. They were the entire reason people trusted Circuit City enough to buy something complicated and expensive there instead of somewhere cheaper. This was a company built from a barbershop conversation into one of the great American retail success stories. And it was about to make the decision that undid all of it.
Through the 1990s, a rival was quietly catching up. Best Buy. By 1996, Best Buy had overtaken Circuit City in market share, and the gap kept widening every single year after. Circuit City's leadership responded with a series of decisions that, looking back, are almost hard to believe. In 2000, new CEO Alan McCullough decided Circuit City would stop selling major appliances entirely to focus purely on consumer electronics. The timing could not have been worse. This happened right before a boom in home appliance sales tied to the real estate market. Circuit City walked away from a growing category right as it was about to take off. That decision alone contributed to a 15% revenue decline. Meanwhile, the company had spun off a side business years earlier, a used car retail chain called CarMax. CarMax would go on to become hugely successful in its own right, today worth more than Circuit City's entire electronics business ever was. The same company couldn't replicate that customer-focused success in its own core stores.
Despite declining sales, Circuit City still had a lot of cash on hand. partly from spinning off CarMax, partly from selling its private label credit card business. Instead of investing that cash into fixing the actual problems, store experience, e-commerce, competing with Best Buy directly, leadership chose something else. Between 2003 and 2007, Circuit City spent almost $1 billion buying back its own stock. $1 billion spent propping up the share price while the underlying business kept eroding underneath it. It didn't work. The stock still fell from around $20 in 2003 to just $4.20 by the end of 2007.
And this brings us back to March 2007, the decision that defines this entire story. Circuit City's leadership decided the company needed to cut costs. Their solution? Identify the highest paid salespeople in every store, specifically because they were high paid, and fire them. 3,400 of the company's most experienced, most knowledgeable sales associates let go in a single announcement. The plan was to replace them with new hires at lower, market-based wages. Some laid-off employees were told they could reapply for their old jobs after a 10-week waiting period at the new, lower pay. The result was immediate and exactly what you'd expect. Customers walked into stores and found nobody who could explain how a home theater system actually worked. The expertise that had defined Circuit City since that first store in Richmond was just gone overnight. Within months, the Washington Post was already reporting the strategy appeared to be backfiring. Sales were slowing, not improving. That holiday season, same-store sales fell almost 12%. Remaining employees noticed something else too. If selling too much got your coworkers fired for earning too much pay, there was no longer any real incentive to sell well at all.
By 2008, things were unraveling fast. In April, Blockbuster, yes, the video rental company, actually made a serious bid to acquire Circuit City, worth about $1 billion. By July, as the broader economy worsened, Blockbuster withdrew that offer. Then the 2008 financial crisis hit directly. Vendors like Sony and Hewlett-Packard grew reluctant to keep supplying a retailer that increasingly looked like it might not survive. Circuit City owed both companies over $100 million combined. On November 10, 2008, Circuit City filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The company closed over 150 stores immediately and laid off 17% of its remaining workforce. Unable to find a buyer willing to take on the whole business, Circuit City was forced into total liquidation in early 2009, final closing sales, empty shelves, and the entire chain gone, less than 60 years after that conversation in a barber's chair.
So what actually killed Circuit City? It wasn't just Amazon. It wasn't just Best Buy. Those pressures were real, but plenty of retailers survived tougher competition than that. What makes this story different is how many of the fatal wounds were self-inflicted. Walking away from appliances at exactly the wrong moment. Spending $1 billion on stock buybacks instead of fixing the business. And then, the decision that sealed it. Firing the very people who made customers trust the store in the first place. Business schools still study that March 2007 layoff today as a case study in what some call management-led suicide. A company that, faced with a real threat, chose to gut the one thing that actually made it competitive. The same company that grew from a single televised idea in a barbershop chair ended by deciding its own best people were the problem. If you found this one interesting, next time we're looking at another company that had every chance to fix itself and chose the opposite instead. Subscribe so you don't miss it.